Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Mike, we are breaking down some things that we think are really hurting Marvel Comics, kind of going through and looking at fixing the brand of Marvel Comics. We identified kind of three key things that we thought they needed to do, looking at the MCU first, then the comic book line. And the last one is probably the one that is most important for you and me, and that is Marvel finding a way to get the next generation of fans or younger fans to actually invest in Marvel comic books. And I think this means a lot to us both as fathers who have young kids that we would like to read comic books. But I think just as comic book fans in general too, we want to see this medium carry on and find that next generation of fans. And comic book stores kind of as you go in now, it's a little bit more gray-haired guys or guys who don't have any hair like you and me who are buying the comic books now
Right.
instead of the younger generation of folks. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about why we think that's unique to Marvel and what some things that we think could really help Marvel do that. Again, we come at this as DC comic book fans mostly, but we have a lot of love for Marvel Comics as well. And so I think one of the things is where I think this is a bigger issue for Marvel than DC, and Mike could be interested if you agree with me on it. DC seems to have made a conscious choice to become the more adult-oriented brand of comic books. From the decisions they made with the cinematic universe, where the tone of the films were much darker, even stuff, you can attribute some of that to Zack Snyder, but even stuff like the Batman and this Penguin TV series they have, those are very heavy PG-13 or R-rated kind of series. You look at the comic book lines, the influences of like Alan Moore and Frank Miller, and how much stuff like The Killing Joke and stories like that kind of dictated the tone of DC. DC seems, I mean, they have some initiatives. There's always a Batman and Scooby-Doo and a couple Superman things out there. But DC seems to have really kind of punted on the younger audience, even in their video game sphere with like the Arkham games and Injustice,
Can we
where
just
those are
say it?
much more adult oriented.
Can we just say it? They're all in on the adult
On the adult.
market. Yeah, the older
And
guys. Which
DC All In has just given you unlimited pun opportunities for that.
yeah,
Marvel, on the other hand, what I will give Marvel credit for, the MCU, while it had its serious moments, when you went to those movies, they were full of families, full of younger kids. Their video games, even the Spider-Man games, while they touch on more serious things, they're not dark in a way like the Arkham games are. You get there a little bit with some of the moments with Venom and stuff, but not nearly to the level of that. The prevalence of stuff like the Spidey and His Amazing Friends cartoon that is all over the toddler kids aisle and on Disney Kids and all this stuff. They seem to have had a unique effect with Marvel of appealing to younger audiences in a way that DC hasn't. And I just noticed, with my 15-year-old and my 2-year-old, when my 15-year-old was younger, he gravitated towards Iron Man. He gravitated towards Cap. It might have been the masks or the design of the characters. And I'm seeing my toddler, despite him, sharing a name with a DC superhero, Halloween, he wanted to be Captain America. When we go to the toy aisle, he wants the Black Panther toy or the Spider-Man toy. He really only picks up Batman, I think, somewhat out of even it too of like guilt of dad really wants me to get this Batman kind of
yeah.
thing. And so I think what we look at is, do you think Marvel has more appeal to younger audiences, Mike, in a way that DC doesn't? And as someone who cares about that, what would you look at as a way to try to, if you were put in charge again, we made it your job to try to engage a younger audience, what would you do?
Oh my gosh, there's just so many avenues of smart marketing, and people have done this before, like put the toys and the comics together. If that doesn't link it up, I think as an entity, Marvel, now part of DC or whatever, when they do these licensing agreements, they need to have first and foremost in their mind, how is this going to not only help our brand, but help our publishing side, which let's face it, that's where all this stuff came from. All those ideas came from the publishing side, and that's struggling. So we need to help them out. It's so important to get the next generation excited about it. And they are excited about it. That's the thing. They are super excited about these great Marvel heroes,
Just not
and
on the comic book angle, yeah.
but not in the publishing end. And guess what? If that dries up, what do you got left?
Yeah.
Where the story's going to come from. You can't give that part away because we've seen what happens when somebody who's not invested in the comic book medium gets a hold of a different medium, say video games, TV shows, or movie, and you see where the direction it goes. it usually falls off the cliff. So because they're not invested, they're not steeped in the culture and the tradition of these legacy characters, they don't write them the way they need to be written. And so if you lose the publishing, you run the risk of losing the property, and you've got to get the kids involved because they're the next generation. And it's okay to have a comic book with a toy, or maybe a QR code that gives you a coupon to go pick up a free comic and see who's at your local comic book shop. There's a million ways that it could get worked into. And why not have like a 3-part trade paperback for the new Spider-Man game that comes out on PlayStation 5? And like it links up with the storyline of the game, and it gets you into the comic shop, and then and then have an offshoot of it where they could maybe start a pull list and put it on their pull list and get it every month. But you've got to capture that audience where they are, and right now they're not at the comic book store. So but you have all these great you know marketing opportunities with and branding opportunities with the toys, the t-shirts, the diapers, the sippy cups, the you name it. It's lunch boxes. Why can't a lunchbox have a comic in it and a coupon to buy the next issue?
Yeah.
Why, you just have to think about it from an executive standpoint and say, hey, okay, so we're going to we're going to go into a deal with this lunchbox manufacturer, and they want to put some of our properties on there. So let's make sure we also boost the publishing side of the
Mhm.
brand because it needs it.
Yeah, I think the thing is there's a couple things that I hear people say um, that I think when they talk about a younger generation of readers, I hear people go, well, the reason comic books aren't selling anymore is because the kids are playing video games or the kids are on their phone. Well, the thing is, it doesn't seem to be hurting manga. I mean, that's the thing that's always funny to me is I hear so many people talk about, well, read, it's because just people don't read anymore. No, people just aren't reading American comic books. The mangas are flying off the shelves, and there are more and more of them every single day. I mean, you go to
Have you
Barnes and
been to the
Noble.
new have you been to the new Barnes and Noble in
Yeah,
Alamo
Barnes and
Ranch?
Noble has like 3 walls of it. You go to Walmart, you go to Target, you go to any of these kind of brick and mortar stores that people go to. I mean, I've even noticed at our local grocery stores here in Texas, at HEB, they have all these manga things in the book section for kids, coloring books of the manga characters and stuff like that. So it's not that kids just aren't reading this material or don't care anymore, because these stores are clearly stocking this stuff because it's moving. I think
Right.
what they have to do is, I think one thing you mentioned is, I think they need to go back a little bit. I look back at some of these older action figures like He-Man used to have, where you bought the toy and it had a little mini comic in the back. And that was how you just got kids reading comic books and interested in the story. I think, you go back to these aisles where they sell these Marvel Legends figures and they sell, these Spider-Man as an Amazing Friends kit figures. If you had it in there in the packaging that, hey, here's a little comic book for your kid in the back, I think that would be interesting for them, with maybe a good story and a to be continued. And hey, the next issue is on sale at your local comic book store on this date, right? To build some anticipation. Or if every month, hey, a new Spider-Man figure comes out and there's a concurrently running storyline behind the action figure. And so those collectors who buy that, here it is. And if you want the to be continued, it is at your local comic book store so that you could read it. I think you have to use that multimedia approach to try to get some of these folks. I think the other thing is, we've seen some inroads to comic books doing like manga. I know there was a Deadpool, I think it was called like Deadpool Samurai. I think there was a Spider-Man one called like Spider-Man Fake Red or something like that. My son, who's 15, he's a manga fan. He couldn't read those Deadpool things fast enough. He couldn't read the Spider-Man one fast enough. He was fascinated by it. And yet, Deadpool hasn't had a new volume of that Deadpool Samurai in years. I think that was 2 or 3 years ago. Had they kept publishing it, he would have bought that every single time it came out. And that's the thing, is sometimes it seems like Marvel, especially, will kind of dip their toes into it a little bit, but they never commit. And that's the thing, is if they would make a serious publishing push to either a manga style format of, we're going to release these huge chunks of 80-page stories in the same size as manga and release that every month and have that in these stores, or just go the manga route like they have tried. And hey, every month there's a Deadpool manga, every month there's a Spider-Man manga, and people read that. I think you could get some of these readers who have become addicted to that manga format of comic books where they get a sizable chunk for $9 or $10. I think that would get some of them back and get some of these readers, especially because, and this is a unique challenge to comic books. And I've heard this from readers at the store, I've heard this from family members of myself. If you drop out of the hobby for a couple years, getting back in is really, really hard because like you'll go and you're like, oh, I've heard great things about, Absolute Batman, or I've heard great things about Ultimate Spider-Man. And so then you go to the store and it's like, well, sorry, too late, man. That came out 6 weeks ago. We don't have that copy for you. But hey, wait another 5 months, and if you're still interested, you might get a trade paperback of that. And it's like if you're gonna push a big issue like an Ultimate Spider-Man #1 or an Ultimate Black Panther #1 or something like that, you need to do a huge wide release push of that where that's available for anybody who wants it. I know we get addicted to these collector markets, and if I can get a 9.8 CGC graded Ultimate Spider-Man #1 in a case or something like that, it's worth $200. That's fine, I guess, but that's such a
Kind of
short
sad.
term, specific niche market of fan who wants that. And it's like you're trying to grow a new audience. Imagine if when Ultimate Spider-Man came out, hey, it's going to be
That's the whole
everywhere in the
thing.
comic stores.
That's the whole thing, Reed. I'm not sure that they are trying to grow a new audience.
The thing is, they've got to, and I think that's the
I
weirdest thing is,
agree.
I think with Marvel, like, there's people who go out, they just don't care about the comics anymore. I've heard people say that. Then why do they keep making them? Like, someone has to care. Otherwise, they just close the publishing wing. So
Yeah.
the thing is, if you're going to do some launch like Ultimate Spider-Man #1, how great would it have been if when that comic came out, instead of it being if you didn't get to the store at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning to pick that up, you don't get the comic? How great would it have been if, hey, we're just going to inundate the stores with this thing? And you know what? It's going to be in Walmart and it's going to be in Target. And there's a QR code where you can download the story and it'll give you the date when the reprint comes out and you can get that so that you might get a bigger audience behind these things.
Yeah.
Right. Instead,
I
they've
could
made it
even
so
foresee
dang hard.
I could even foresee like a digital copy. Like
Mhm.
so you when the comic they can only order so much, right? And the
Yeah.
print runs are limited, you have to be a fortune teller, to understand. But something like Spider-Man, you're gonna sell, whatever
Well,
Spider-Man.
what's weird is though, like
But
it's a
like
unique
you
problem
could
to
send
comic books.
you could send a little thing to the comic shop, like say, hey, if you run out, let them know to
Let
scan the
us know and we can get it out to you in a week. Like,
yeah, scan the
because
QR code, and you could get it digitally for a discount. Maybe you miss the hard. That way, the fan that comes in 2 weeks later and said, "Hey, my buddy told me to go pick up the new Spider-Man."
yeah, I love Spider-Man. He told
He
me there was
goes,
this
"Oh,
great #1 issue.
here's #2, but I also have the QR code so you could read #1, so you're not behind." And then
Yeah.
because what happens is when they come in and the hot comic that everybody's talking about, you're in the run, you're like issue 3 or 4, and you're like, yeah, forget it.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
you just stop.
that's the reality of what happens with
And
me
I'll
when
say
I go
that
to the
even as a
store.
collector myself, like I picked up the first 2 issues of Space Ghost, this series Dynamite's doing a few months back. I thought I had it on my pull list. My mistake, not my comic shops. I forgot to put it on. And I kind of noticed the other week, I'm like, man, I haven't read an issue of that in a long time to get canceled. And then I walked in the store and like issue 6 was out. And I'm like, man, I missed 3, 4, and 5. We have 7 stores in San Antonio. I can't find that dang comic anywhere. Like I have gone to 4 or 5 different stores looking for the issues I missed. I can't get it. And so it's like I guess I could go to Amazon or order it. But I compare that to the availability of manga. Like when my kid
Yeah,
decides I'm going to start reading One Piece or I'm going to start reading Kaiju #8 or any of these series, it is so incredibly easy for him to find the first volume of that story at a reasonable price and get invested. And
they're
that's the thing that
they're
I think that
they're
comic books have
reprinted.
got to stop chasing is there's this desire of like we want a #1 issue to be really valuable or we want to reboot all the time. And it's like, no, you either have to pick a clear starting point that everyone can have, or you have to have that the run is really, really long and therefore the first one's valuable. You can't have, we're going to reboot all the time and it's impossible to track but also it's really, really hard to find the first issue. It's the worst of all worlds, and they seem to be one of the only businesses that do that. And that
Yeah.
if my kid wants to get into video games and he's never played a Halo game before, it's incredibly easy for him to go to a video game store or go on Steam or anyone else and find all of the Halo games and play them. If he wants to get into manga, he can do that. If he wants to watch anime, he can do that. And yet, comic books, it's like this. Well, you want to read the first issue of Deadpool? Well, you better have $50 to go get the Epic collection of the old Deadpool runs, and there's 15 of those that all cost $100. And it's like, no, man, I'm good. I just wanted to read the first issue of Deadpool and see if I liked it. And I think that's the thing they've got to do with these younger audiences. They're used to an on-demand thing. And I know there's stuff like Marvel Unlimited and some of these streaming apps for comic books. None of those have taken off enough. They need to, I think, go to that manga style format where, hey, we've got a dedicated series that comes out for this type of fan. And every month you get there.
I think if they rebooted the comics, they could keep up with that kind of continuity. And I
Mhm.
know my comic shop is really good about chasing down the second print runs of stuff that I missed initially.
Yeah,
And I get it, I
absolutely.
get it, I get it in about a month or so. If I missed an issue, 2 or 3 weeks, if I'm lucky, sometime sooner. But I really think that if they rebooted everything, because that's the other thing about manga, it's this ongoing story.
Mhm.
Whereas with Marvel and DC, there's all this muddy continuity that's happened the last 15, 20 years. Um, if they started fresh and they had like some print on demand, because what happens with manga, say like One Piece, you know, they've been publishing continuously.
20, 30 years, yeah.
And if they need to publish, oh, you're out of number ones. Oh, don't worry about it. We'll send you some more. And it's easy, right?
Hmm.
But for comics, for whatever, they stop the presses, and that's about it. They
Yeah.
might do
Or you got to
might
wait
do a
6
third print
months
run,
and
or you could wait for the trade paperback.
yeah, and I think that's the issue is with the thing that manga gives kids that comics doesn't is when my kid gets on a whim that he goes, I want to start reading this manga series, he can find it. If he gets on a whim and goes, I want to start reading this Deadpool thing, it's like, well, you got to go wait for the collected edition because if you go to the stores, you're not gonna be able to find it. They
Yeah,
need to have a resource available for those fans that, hey, when I go see the Deadpool movie or I go see the Venom movie, I can go and go, man, I want to read the new Venom comic book. And you can find it available. You don't have to hope, like, well, if I go to the 6 stores locally, maybe one of them will have one of the issues, and then I can go on eBay and buy the other issues. Or maybe if I wait 6 months, it'll be available in trade for me. They Comic books seems to be stuck in a thing from the past of how
it's an old business
stuff was
model.
sold years ago. And the
Yeah,
whole thing is like, for you and I, the comic book, geeks who have been doing this for years, we know Wednesdays when comics come out, right? And so we know if there's a book that we know is going to sell well, we pretty much have the wherewithal to know it's either got to be on my sub list or I got to go show up to shop early.
yeah.
For someone who's a non-comic book fan, if they see the Deadpool movie and they're like, oh, everyone's telling me there was this really good Deadpool comic, I'm going to go try to find it. If it's in a single issue format, man, good luck. Good luck. And by the time you get there and they don't have it, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I wanted to read it, but not that bad. And I
And,
think they've
and
got to do something to address that for these younger fans.
and with the kids, it's all about the spur of the moment, and that's how I got hooked on comics because they were at Circle K every time I went, and I could ride my bike there and
Mhm.
buy football cards and you know candy bars and get my comics. It was easy for me to get. And for kids, it's that same thing. It's an impulse buy, and if it's not there, then it's just lost. And then that sticks with the kid, like, oh yeah, that Deadpool thing. I tried to get into it, I couldn't get into it.
Well,
It's
no,
going to
and I've seen
discourage
a
them.
number of times that my kid has done that. We go into the stores looking for a comic book, they don't have it. Just walk over to the mangas. Hey, I know what volume I need. Number 9 of, Kaiju number 8's out, bam.
Yeah,
Read that, has exactly what he wants, picks up exactly where he was. It's really easy for him to find. Comic books, I think, especially Marvel, has got to find some way. And I think the solution for Marvel would be as much as us Wednesday warriors and folks who have been buying this stuff for years wouldn't like it. They either need to have a dedicated line with good artists and writers on it that releases in that manga format with the numbering like manga for these kids, or they need to have where if you want a comic book like a new Deadpool #1 or a Spider-Man #1, that they have some sort of arrangement with the publishers, these comic book shops, Walmart, Target, whatever, where they go, hey, anytime you need the #1 issue, tell us, we will get it sent to you, and you have copies of that on hand so that that can be there. What's funny is they kind of used to seem to get this because, I mean, man, you still go into a comic book store. That X-Men #1 with the Jim Lee cover from the 90s, that comic book was everywhere. You can still walk into most comic book shops if they still old things, and you can find that comic because they
Yeah.
kind of seem to get like, hey, man, we really want this to be the starting point for people. And so we
Yeah.
want that dang thing available everywhere. We just seem to not get that anymore. I think lastly, why this is important, and I think the last thing Marvel and DC need to do, I think they need to get back to creating original characters again and new characters. Because what happens is some of the younger audience, and I've noticed this with my kids, the characters that I connected with, some register with my kids. But what I've noticed with like my 15-year-old and with a lot of younger fans, characters like Deadpool, characters like Venom, characters like Miles Morales connect more with this newer generation of kids, right? And Deadpool and Venom, you're 30 years ago. Miles is, I think, 15. Some people talk about the publishing wing not being all that valuable anymore. The reason Marvel, I think, needs to keep trying to create characters is Deadpool being created in the 90s. If you just went, you know what, new characters don't work. Man, that's a $2 billion franchise at this point. You know, we can mock the Venom movies for not being that good. They've made like almost 2 billion at the box office combined with those, and that's one of the most influential characters. I don't personally like Miles Morales, but that series, the films, has made a ton of money. There's video games of that character now.
Those
I think
movies were good. Those movies were pretty good.
you and I will always disagree on those ones, but
Yeah.
I know that you are a fan. I will respect that you're a fan, and we'll do a video at some point where I air my grievances with those. But I think the thing is they've got to keep trying to create newer characters that have a more classic comic book character look. And that one of the things we've seen Marvel do, they have really tried to push characters like Kamala Khan, and they have really tried to push, some of these newer characters. I'm trying to remember the other few that they were really pushing a couple years ago. It was her, X-23, some of these other ones, and it just hasn't taken off. And the thing is, when I look at Deadpool and I look at Venom and I look at Miles, well, the reason those seem to connect with younger audiences, it's the mask. It's the really cool looking mask and anything that gets them to where like even my toddler who's two, he sees the Deadpool mask. He's like, oh, that's cool. I like that. I like Deadpool. And it's like he's way away from ever reading anything Deadpool. But the look of that character and what we've done now with our character design, what I'll always give the 90s and what I will always give Stan and Jack and Marvel in particular. Marvel did such a good job of designing these masks and these cool looks for these
Don't
characters.
forget Steve Ditko.
Ditko as well, right? That captured kids' imaginations in a way that DC really doesn't. It's
Hey,
weird.
and
Batman is the only character at DC that really seems to capture little kids' attentions. And I think 90% of that's the cool costume. And Marvel seems to have really gotten away from the cool costumes that like a Deadpool and a Venom and Miles Morales have, or something about that design just registers with kids.
awesome. And I'll do you one better on Miles Morales. Jackson has loved him ever since he came out. Even, he goes online and he wants the shoes that Miles had. So like there's a specific kind of a shoe.
Yeah, the Nikes. Yeah, I think he wears
Yeah,
Jordans or something like
the
that. But yeah,
Nikes, Jordan, but colored with red and white or whatever. And he's got to have them just because of Miles. So
yeah, no, there's something to Marvel's characters, and I think this was inevitably what made the movies as successful as they did, is characters like Iron Man, and how many, I remember when my 15-year-old was younger, how much he wanted to get the little Iron Man mask,
oh
in the costume
yeah.
things. My toddler, how much he wants a Captain America shield and the Captain America mask.
Hey,
Marvel
that's another thing. If you buy the costume, you also get a comic.
a comic book in there. Yeah. I think that's the thing is Marvel seems to have really gotten lazy in their new character designs where, to be honest, and I say this as an insult, even though I'm a fan, they look more like DC characters. And DC, I will only say I think DC doesn't register as much. Younger kids just don't seem to gravitate towards DC the way they do Marvel. And I think a huge amount of that is the character design. Batman looks cool because the mask. I think the Flash only my both of my kids like the Flash when they're younger. I think that's because of the really cool, costume that Barry always had. What Infantino was the designer in that one, right?
Yep.
I think when you look at like Superman, as much as I love Superman, none of my younger kids have gravitated towards Superman because there's no cool mask costume, right? He becomes someone they like old when they're older. I think what's happened with Marvel is when they really nail the character design and the way the characters look. And there's a proven formula. Just like draw a variation that kind of looks like Spider-Man, draw a
Yeah.
cool mask and add some accessories to it. And they seem to grab. I mean, Black Panther, how many kids buy Black Panther action figures just because of how freaking cool the costume looks? And I think
Yep.
if they get back to more character design of that, of
Thanks,
instead of
Jack
going,
Kirby.
yeah. Well, no, it seems like Marvel's tried to do
But
this, but we want it to seem like authentic to certain people groups or cultures. And again, there's nothing wrong with trying that. I think that's okay, but you haven't had a character hit in a while. And when I really look at it, the costume design just seems lazy. And I think, man, if they put more attention into let's design a really cool costume that kids like,
and
that gravitates and grabs readers in a way that other stuff just doesn't.
and that's the probably the final point in this, which is you can't let the publishing wing of these properties go down the tubes because without the great creators like the more modern ones like Jim Lee and others,
Mhm.
Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, those and Carmine Infantino, they designed these costumes. Without the talent that comes out of the publishing industry, you
Mhm.
don't have the explosion of the merchandising and the movies and the TV shows, the cartoons, the video games. All of that comes from the well of inspiration that comes out of great writers and great artists teaming up together to put together these little floppy comic books that we love.
It's just, I think that's the thing they have to pay more attention to is, I mean, how many Boba Fett fans are there simply because of how cool Boba Fett looked?
Right?
Like, if you really watch the Star Wars movies, he really doesn't do anything,
I
but he
know.
looks so freaking cool.
Right?
Like, I want a toy of that guy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think that's the thing. Obviously they've added character depth to him later, but I think that's the thing you got to get to is how many kids gravitated towards the Mandalorian because of how cool the Mandalorian mask was and all that. And I think they've got to get back in the publishing wing. There should just be a guy whose job is new character creation, where he takes the elements of the Deadpools and the Venoms and the Spider-Mans and the Black Panthers and designs cool costumes that you can market with action figures and just get the kid to think the character
Todd
looks cool.
McFarlane.
That's a huge victory.
Todd McFarlane.
Todd McFarlane's still around making toys. I mean, yeah, I
Yeah,
think if you were Marvel, I'd go to McFarlane and went and just, hey man, can you design me 10 new superheroes
yeah.
and just come up with the coolest costumes that you can, and then we'll launch action figures of them. You got McFarlane toys. We'll let
Right.
you publish them, and let's see if any of these register with kids. And if we get it, then we can launch a comic book and keep it. It just seems like from the creative angle of trying to create things that look cool. Marvel and DC has always been kind of lazy in that. I think Marvel in particular has gotten very lazy lately. And I think if they put a much more emphasis on that, you could probably capture some of these younger fans. As always, folks, let us know what you guys think below. If you completely disagree with us and think we missed the boat by a mile, that is okay. We always like seeing that from the well. It's great to see those comments. Let us know what you think. But thank you as always for watching. We hope you have a great and blessed week. God bless you. You have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, everybody.